Hi everybody, welcome and thank you for joining us here tonight in An Unlikely Story. We're so appreciative of your support. We couldn't offer all these amazing authors without you, so thank you very much. And tonight we welcome Jerry Thornton. He's going to talk about his new book, actually his first published book, congratulations, From Darkness to Dynasty, the first 40 years of the New England Patriots. Tells the unlikely history of the New England Patriots as it's never been told before. Jerry is one of the first writers for Barstool Sports and was the co-host of the daily Dale and Holly Show on WEEI, Boston's leading sports radio station. Jerry got his start as a stand-up comedian who won the Boston Comedy Riot competition and has also worked colleges and clubs all around New England. From that, he appeared on HBO's Emmy Award-winning Curse of the Bambino and Reverse of the Curse of the Bambino and Comcast Sports New England, and he's also written for ColdHardFootballFacts.com, so quite the resume. So lots of Jerry's stand-up material when he started was related to Boston sports. And in From Darkness to Dynasty, he shares the stories of when it wasn't always sunshine and roses for the Patriots, pre-Tom Brady, when in fact, for the bulk of their existence, it was exactly the opposite. Though difficult to fathom now, the New England Patriots of old weren't just bad, they were laughably bad. So Jerry's the perfect guy to tell this story, and he's going to tell you all about it now. So without further ado, please welcome Jerry Thornton.
I'm wearing this mic. Is this cool? Can everyone hear it? Okay. I want to thank you for letting me be part of the Christmas pageant too, by the way. Thank you very much. The elves will be out later. Full disclosure, usually when I do these, in fact, every time I've done these, I've worn a button-down shirt. Tonight, not knowing that I was going to be here in little, Marshmallow World in the winter set here, I decided to go without that, and so I'm wearing that. I've actually gotten this to go to ugly sweater parties, but there is nothing in the world less ugly than this sweater. Right? True story, and I'm going to clean this up for kids in the audience, but just before I get going about the book. Had this conversation with my brother a little while ago. I swear it's a true story. He calls me, doesn't even say hello. I go, hey, what's up? He goes, all right, here's the deal. You could be Tom Brady, married to Gisele Bundchen, or you could be Justin Verlander from the Tigers, married to Kate Upton. Who would you rather be? And I said, out of those names you mentioned, I think I most want to be Gisele. Like, dude, that is the creepiest thing. That is a true story. Anyway, thanks for having me. Thanks to Kim for the nice introduction. By way of full disclosure, I was with Dale and Holly up until a few weeks ago. If you don't know, I walked away from what was the greatest gig in the world, talking about sports. But I know you seem a little exasperated, my friend. It's because Barstool Sports is too much of an opportunity to pass up. It is a national audience. It has exploded. It's turned into a corporation that was, as the guys at the radio station have said to me, wait a minute, so you're leaving here to go to a place where you're going to have a national audience, not have to drive into the city, you're going to have more people watching, and it's going to be way less work, and you're getting paid more money, and you're leaving. Why? But it was not an easy decision at all. One of the things I loved about being at WEEI was I had my own podcast there, something I'm hoping to replicate with Barstool. And the podcast to me was fun because it was a chance to talk about things that weren't just sports. I had on other comedians that I've worked with. I've had like reality TV stars. And I had some book authors, including, like, for instance, the amazing Kreskin, right? A guy who's done 60 years in show business. I had on a Navy SEAL who served with Chris Kyle, the American sniper. That was amazing to talk to him. And anytime I had a book author on, my first question, I think every author should be asked this right off the bat, is why? Why did you write the book? Well, I'll ask and answer that question. The reason I wrote From Darkness to Dynasty is because I've always wanted to read this book. And I waited and waited, and the universe was taking its sweet time getting around to it. So I said, to heck with it, I will jump on the grenade and I'll be the one to write this book. The reason being that the Patriots are, as we think of them, they are the center of the football world. in a league, in America where football is the center of our culture. I mean, football isn't just the biggest sport in America, it's the biggest thing. It's the only show on TV whose ratings go up every year. It's the most popular sport, it's the most popular pop culture thing, it makes the most money. And it's been that way throughout the 2000s. And during that time, the Patriots have dominated the league on the field. They've won 4 Super Bowls. They've been to 5 straight conference championship games. They've been to 6 Super Bowls in all. You have to go back to 2002 to find a year where they won fewer than double-digit games, which is insane. They've also made a lot of news off the field. By applause, have anybody heard of a little matter known as the Deflategate? Anybody heard? Yes. A thing which, by the way, wasn't the biggest story in the sports world. It was the biggest news story in America. As insane as that sounds, for weeks, the Deflategate knocked off the top of the news, front page of the New York tabloids, the top story in the network news was whether or not this guy, Tom Brady, might have let some air out of some footballs. Not the weather, not the economy, not the election, not the war on terror, that story. Nothing else in the world, nothing else in the sports world could have been that big a deal, except it involved the Patriots, it involved the NFL, and it involved this guy. This book is not about those Patriots. This book is about the horrible, downtrodden, dysfunctional, bizarre, surreal, often violent and tragic story of the Patriots that I grew up with, loving and falling in love with. I grew up in Weymouth, so talk slow. Really? Are there Weymouth people here?
Abington.
Oh, Abington, okay. You know, Weymouth is known as the gateway to Abington. That's on our license plate. Excuse me. So, you know, if you grew up in that time, I was the youngest of 5 in a Patriots first household during times when, at different moments in history, the Bruins, the Celtics, or the Red Sox dominated. When I was real little, you had the Bobby Orr Bruins. If you lived near a skating rink, that place was built because of those big bad Bruins. The Red Sox went to World Series during our times. They were always huge. The Celtics, when I was in high school, they drafted Larry Bird and rebooted the dynasty. During that time, to say that you were a Patriots fan first was unheard of. I mean, I'd be in my room listening on a clock radio because the games weren't on local TV because they couldn't sell more than 30,000 tickets, while all the normal kids in my neighborhood were out playing in the fall leaves or, you know, throwing snowballs at each other. Saying that the Patriots were your favorite team then would be like someone saying, who's your favorite one of the Three Stooges? And you said, Shemp. If you don't know, Shep is a nightmare. Because the Patriots, in addition to the fact that they were typically terrible on the field, were laughing stocks off of it. This was a team that, and getting into the book, it begins with really their origin story, which was the old American Football League, which later got absorbed into the NFL and became the American Football Conference, which was 7 guys in a room deciding to form some teams to take on the NFL. Every one of them was a millionaire. There were oil barons, there were guys that inherited hotel chains. They needed an 8th, so they somehow settled upon this guy named Billy Sullivan, who had done a little bit of work with the Boston Braves, didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. To buy his way into this team, he spent about $8,000 that he and his wife had socked away to get a cottage down the Cape. In a room full of millionaires starting a football league. And when he finally got it, what he got was a piece of paper that said, you now own a football team. In a league that didn't exist, he didn't have anybody who knew how to put together a football team. He didn't have a general manager. He didn't have a coach. He didn't have a stadium. For 11 years, the Patriots played their home games in places like Boston University, which was like a terrible, even by, you know, run-down college football stadiums standards, it was dilapidated. Boston College, Harvard Stadium, Fenway Park, which they actually liked. The players felt like when they finally got to Fenway that it was, you know, the big leagues. Like, guys were telling themselves, like, we're actually playing in a place that Ted Williams played. Like, I'm sharing a locker that maybe had once been used by Babe Ruth or whatever. But if you know Fenway, it is uniquely, terribly unsuited to have a football game, right? If you remember last year, Notre Dame played there, and what they did is they set up the end zones. You can picture the footprint of Fenway. One end zone was down by home plate, and the other one was out by the right field wall. Well, that means that the sideline seats, what would be the good seats, were completely like, that's what I'm looking for. The players standing there blocked the people in the good seats, so they came up with this unique idea that is unique because it's the worst idea in the history of the world. They put both sidelines on the same side. Both teams were out there on like the Green Monster side. Now see if you can see the flaw in that design. Players would simply just walk over into the other team's huddles and just go, I hear they're talking about running the ball more. Again, this has never been tried before or since. During that time, they had a home game in Birmingham, Alabama. They had another home game against the San Diego Chargers in San Diego. Like giving away the one advantage they had, which was home field advantage, because the Red Sox had made the World Series to everyone's shock, so they had to figure out where to play. And they apparently couldn't figure out somewhere in the 3,000-mile expanse from Boston to San Diego to find one other football stadium in the world, so they just went out there. In that time, the team was so badly run that these are stories that a lot of them were handed down in my family, kind of like folklore, like an oral tradition of the team. For instance, there was one guy, some of you older guys may know the story of Bob Bellagio. Went to Notre Dame. Fun fact, was actually mentioned by name in the movie Rudy. They called him Harpo, but the story of him, and this was always one of my favorites, was he got cut from the team middle of the week, and he and his friend decided they would just go to the game anyway, like, oh, what the heck, let's see the game. So they go tailgating in the parking lot, and they throw down a couple of beers and get into the stadium, find their seats, and his friend says, tell you what, Bob, I'll go down and get a couple of more beers. He says, all right, sure. While he's sitting there, he hears over the PA system, Bob Bellagio report to the Patriots sideline. So he goes down there not knowing what they want him for. They go, we have a couple of guys holding out on their contracts, suit up. Well, not being a fool and wanting to get a payday, he goes in, throws on his uniform, goes on his buddy comes back to their seats with beers in his hands. No, Bob. Does anybody know where my friend went? Went over the PA system, he hears, tackle on the play by number 24, Bob Bellagio. That is a true story. In that time, they had other stories. They had a couple of team players that were rookies that they had a game in the Houston Astrodome. Those guys got lost. Like they never made it back to the team hotel. No one who knew where they were. Apparently, they get this frantic call from inside the stadium, like a horror movie, like, the call's coming from inside the house! These guys just wandered off somewhere and didn't know how to find the way out of there and had to call the coach to come break them out of the Houston Astrodome. In that time, they had a guy, and this is, again, one of those stories that I grew up listening to, and I'll just do a brief reading. The first one of these I ever did, I just spoke extemporaneously like I'm doing now, and a veteran of these things, who guy, clearly this was not his first barbecue, came up and said, it was a lot of fun, but you got to do a reading. Apparently that's mandatory. So, they had a coach, and this is to back up a little bit. The most famous game in the history of football was Super Bowl III. That was the one where Joe Namath famously guaranteed that his team would beat the Colts, which was huge because they were giant underdogs in the game. They went ahead, they beat the Colts. It basically put the American Football League on the map and forced the NFL to absorb them into what is now the AFC. Well, Billy Sullivan went at that game because he needed a new coach. Coaches were getting fired every year, every other year or so. So he had a choice. He had one guy who was highly recommended to him. He was an assistant with the Colts. And after that game, he came to the conclusion, like, I can't possibly hire this guy because people are going to kill me. Like, how can you hire an assistant of a team that had the biggest choke job in the history of pro sports? So instead of hiring that guy, he hired this assistant who was with the Jets. That assistant from the Colts he didn't hire was a man named Chuck Noll, who went on to take over the Pittsburgh Steelers, built a dynasty. They won 4 Super Bowls in 6 years. That's never been done before or since. The guy he did hire from the Jets was a man named Cleve, spelled Clyde but pronounced Cleve Rush, who went on to have a nervous breakdown. That's not hyperbole, that is literally what happened to him. He ended up on the Patriots watch, broke down, and was institutionalized. So, all right, Cleve Rush, establishing shot. The Patriots are holding a press conference. Team brass and assembled media fill a conference room. It's Cleve Rush's second day with the club. He'd met with the Boston media on his first day, and now the team had called this press conference to introduce their new general manager, George Sawyer, whom they'd hired to replace Ed McKeever. For the past 8 years, Sawyer had also been with the Jets as the director of player personnel, so Rush has the honor of introducing him. Rush steps to the podium, he grabs the mic stand, and the new head coach of the Patriots is standing before the world with 120 volts of electric death running up his arm. Everyone looks open, jaws frozen in horror, not knowing how to react. Through some bizarre wiring mishap, the microphone was connected to a wall outlet. Fortunately for Rush, and for whatever insurance company handled the team's workman's comp claims, one man keeps his wits about him. Team director Danny Marr pulls the plug and probably saves Rush's life in the process. Rush takes a moment, regains his composure, goes back to the podium, and one of those grace under fire moments says, "I heard the Boston press was rough, but I had no idea they'd be this rough." Boom! Rib shot. Now, just as I read this next part, I just want to have you keep in mind the NFL as we currently know it, where teams take charter flights, they stay in five-star hotels, where even the worst team in football is worth approaching $1 billion. This is 1969 that this story happened. Probably no modern pro sports team has ever had less operating capital than the Boston Patriots. They were Boston then. The cheapness of the organization is legendary. Their practice facility for most of the 60s was a dirt lot at Phillips Academy High School in Andover, Massachusetts. They had no weight room and no whirlpool. To this day, players tell stories of film sessions held in an equipment shed with a bed sheet hung over a rusty water pipe used as a movie screen while they sat on boxes and milk crates. It was even worse on rainy days. Quote, "The roof leaked and I remember the coach kept a bunch of light bulbs in his pocket," guard Lenny St. Jean said. "The water would come in through the roof, hit the projector bulb and burn it out. We'd all have to sit there and wait while he replaced it." Mutiny on the bedspread. On one Patriots road trip to Buffalo, the plan was for the team to fly in the day of the game and then fly home right after, rather than spring for an overnight stay at a hotel. They'd go right from the airport to the stadium with just enough time to eat, get suited up, and take the field for warm-ups. The problem was that the time of the flight to New York was changed to much earlier in the day, so the team would have hours to kill and no place to do it. Patriots director Paul Slonovet's family happened to own a motel in Buffalo, and he made arrangements so the players could get rooms for the afternoon. But the Pats had also made a deal with the manager, no messing up the beds. Players could lie down on top of the bedspread, but they couldn't sleep in the beds because he didn't want to have to pay the chambermaids to come in later to make them up. Any player who pulled back his covers would be fined $10. Now this was 40 years before Dateline NBC and CSI would shine black lights on hotel bedspreads and showed us that they all basically looked like Jackson Pollock paintings from all the DNA and bodily fluids all over them. Nevertheless, most of the players simply refused to cooperate just on general principle. A mini uprising took place in which the players ripped back their covers and took their nappies between the nice clean sheets like free men. Quick note about Cleve Rush, by the way. He had a preternatural fear of snakes. And I don't mean like a normal manly fear of snakes like Indiana Jones, so like we all do, but like an irrational hysterical fear, which his players responded to out of respect for him by taking fake snakes and sneaking them into his onboard luggage onto the plane. Now this is when they were playing at Boston College. The combination of a mentally unstable coach and a cramped, rundown stadium worked out about as badly as you'd expect. The crowds at BC were notoriously rowdy and abusive, a bad situation for a mercurial, thin-skinned crackpot like Rush. He repeatedly got into it with hecklers which, to the surprise of no one but Rush, created a vicious cycle of more heckling. The school's administration was furious. Billy Sullivan was mortified. He pushed Rush aside and explained to him that the Pats were barely hanging on financially, and it was only because Boston College was doing them a favor that they had any place to play at all. Besides, he said, pretty soon it wouldn't be their problem. He explained to his coach that he'd been talking with Harvard about moving to their stadium the following year. Now, the deal wasn't done, and he was telling Rush this in the strictest confidence and asked him not to mention it to anyone until everything was finalized. Rush publicly apologized to BC, and the controversy died down. At least for a few days, which is how long Rush kept his mouth shut. With the team leaving for its next road game, he kicked the entire press corps off the team plane because he had something super secret to tell his players. When the press was gone, he announced to the team that he had been personally talking to the president of Harvard and worked out a deal to move the Patriots there. But he ordered the players not to mention it to reporters or tell anyone else until after the season was over. When the press was allowed back on board, they found out immediately everything Rush had said. From the flight attendant. Again, another true story. So during this time, and this is when I sort of came into the picture, I became old enough to sort of follow the team myself, and just weirdly became attached to that team. This team that it had more bizarre stories, more dysfunctional stories than successes. It was like that stray dog that the boy falls in love with, you know, like the Patriots as a dog had mange and 2 different colored eyes and maybe 3 legs, but I just weirdly became attached to them. And during that time, they finally met with some success. And then they did it again, and then they did it again. And the common factor about all those years was every time they did, it came crashing down and burning around them like smoldering wreckage. The first time they ever won their division, the coach was a man named Chuck Fairbanks, a genius who had innovations that he brought into football that are still in use today. When they had some success, it turns out he had secretly quit on the team, had taken a job with another team, and was using his Patriots office to make phone calls on behalf of his new employer without telling anyone. A few years later, Bill Parcells takes him to the Super Bowl, had quit on the team without telling anybody, had taken a job with another employer, and was using his Patriots office to make phone calls on behalf of that new employer. That's never happened to any team in any sport ever. The Patriots did it twice in the span of 18 years. In between, they went to the Super Bowl against the Bears. You might remember that game.
Yeah.
Patriots were leading in that one, I remember.
3-0.
3-0, that's right. I don't know what happened after that. It's really not relevant. No, they got blown out of the building against one of the greatest teams of all time. And even with that, everyone, I think, were all saying, hey, you know what? They caught lightning in a bottle. This is a good young team. They'll be successful for a while. The very next day, the front page of the Globe had a major drug scandal involving several players on the team. The ones that weren't involved were angry that they were being implicated. Those that weren't angry about being implicated were furious that anybody on the team had ratted out teammates to the press. A massive civil war began in the team, and within a couple of years, they had gone right back to being the worst team in football again. That was what it was like being a Patriots fan. There was one time, and I should mention too, when they finally did get a stadium, which, as I mentioned, took 11 years, my brothers took me to that stadium. It was the first pro sporting event I had ever gone to. And I remember being prepared to be dazzled. Like, I can't wait. I'm finally going to see a real NFL stadium, like those games I watch every Sunday. And I'm going to walk out and I'm going to see the green expanse of the field, and I'm going to be mesmerized. And I walked in and I looked at them and I said, I'm just a kid, but I can tell this place is a dump. Remember that old stadium with the poured concrete and those aluminum benches that would just drain the body heat right out of your butt cheeks, right? You know, like if you went to a game in November, your body temperature wouldn't get back up to 98.6 until August of the following year. And you remember what the stadium was when they first opened, what it was called? Schaefer Stadium. Back in a time where nobody would sell the naming rights to their stadium because it was considered really tacky, that's what the Patriots did. And it wasn't just a beer. It was the worst swill that was ever brewed and put into a can, right? All these hipster beers come back, like Pabst Blue Ribbon, or even Gansett has made this huge comeback. There's no hipster out there asking for Schaefer. Do you remember what their slogan was? Schaefer is the one beer to have when you're having more than one. Roll that around in your brain for a second. Try and slip that past Mothers Against Drunk Driving right now. Oh, there's stuff of it's really toilet water, but I'll tell you, if you suck back enough of these, you won't notice the difference. And games at that stadium weren't just what we would call bad behavior. I mean, today, bad behavior is if you accidentally bump into somebody. That was a breakdown of the societal order. A game at Schaefer's Stadium was like Lord of the Flies with goalposts at either end. So bad that they had a game on a Monday night that was a blowout and got so out of hand that we realized then, when a game is at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I think people start really drinking at the tailgate scene around maybe 9, 10 in the morning. When the game was on at 9 o'clock at night, which Monday Night Football was then, people would start drinking at 9 or 10 in the morning. So much so that there was a game there infamous for the fact that Howard Cosell stopped talking about the football game and was describing the action that was going on below him. They ran out of walk-up space at the police station, so they just chained people to the chain link fence and left them there and said, "We'll come back and get them later."
I know police officers who were doing the chaining.
Who were actually
Wow.
You know some police officers? It wasn't you. You weren't one of the guys.
I know some police officers.
Okay, all right.
who did the chaining.
All right, because we're all friends here. What goes on at unlikely
Some of
stories.
my friends to the
Okay, yeah, well, yeah. One of my favorite stories of Patriots history, it just goes to the fan behavior, how we just did not know how to act. It was like Patriots fans had just dropped down out of the trees and started walking upright like that day. There was one where they clinched a playoff spot and fans tore down the goalposts, which was a tradition, I don't know, about 30 years prior to this. Like nobody was doing this anymore. It was like the wave, only 1,000 times dumber. They didn't just tear down the goalposts. They walked them out of the stadium, walked them down the hill, across the parking lot, and then we're walking them up Route 1. Now, if you know Route 1, it's pretty much known for liquor stores, youth storage facilities, and low-hanging high-tension wires. Which these guys found out about when they realized they got the physics lesson of what happens when pipes of thin steel aluminum, bang into high-tension wires. What happens is electricity and lots of it. And 2 guys got electrocuted. They survived, but they actually later won a lawsuit and sued for like over $1 million. I can only pray that whatever part of their bodies got damaged, it was the reproductive parts. So they have equally stupid children. Anyway, as the team ascended and actually finally got some semblance of respectability, I mentioned Bill Parcells earlier. In one of these bizarre things that could only happen to the Patriots, Parcells once out of New England had, problems with the owner who, he decided to jump ship and go to the New York Jets. Well, the owner had concocted a plan in his contract where he wasn't allowed to. And a legal battle ensued that involved a particularly bizarre press conference. 3 years later, Parcells steps down from the Jets and names his assistant, Bill Belichick, to be the head coach. Belichick doesn't want to coach the Jets. He wants to come and coach the Patriots. It results in an even more bizarre press conference. Both things ended up being fought out by lawyers, and both had to be resolved by the league. That's 3 years apart, but that's the kind of surreal dysfunction that happened to them all the time. And to go back a little bit, I know I'm kind of going out of chronological order, what saved the Patriots in a strange way, and I'm not making this up, was Michael Jackson. Again, a true story. Michael Jackson went on a concert tour, not just any old concert tour, but after Thriller, where he was the hottest pop star in the history of the world and was reuniting with his brothers. This would be like the 12 apostles getting back together and going on tour with Jesus. And Billy Sullivan's son, Chuck, was the owner he was in charge of the business side of the operation, so he owned technically the stadium. And he put the stadium up for collateral to finance this concert tour. Well, he knew less about Michael Jackson than anybody in this room did. Knew nothing about putting together concert tours. Had never done it in his life. He just thought that this would be something he couldn't possibly lose money on. He lost not just the stadium, but the team's control of the stadium ultimately, including, and this was right around the time when Michael Jackson started to lose his marbles. I don't mean the real bad stuff that happened later, but remember when he was like Wacko Jacko, and he was getting the plastic surgery, and he was like, he bought the Elephant Man's bones or whatever. So only then did he find out that people didn't want to buy his warehouse full of Michael Jackson merchandise because the guy was out of his mind. During that tour, they forced Michael to do that Pepsi commercial, the infamous one where the pyrotechnics like burned his hair. The doctors treated Michael Jackson with painkillers. Michael Jackson later overdosed on painkillers. So in a weird way, Michael Jackson bankrupted the Patriots, and they sort of inadvertently, I think, killed him. No, I know. I'm connecting some dots here, but I think you can see. Now, the team stadium was put up for sale and went into bankruptcy, where it was bought by an obscure cardboard box manufacturer by the name of Robert Kraft. Years later, in what was the worst day I've ever spent as a sports fan, Will McDonough, the most well-connected reporter in the history of football, the most plugged in, the Adam Schefter of the newspaper days, went on national radio and said, it's all set, the Patriots are done, they've been sold, they're moving to St. Louis. That very day, Mr. Kraft, who owned the stadium, bought the team, kept them in Foxborough, eventually hired Bill Belichick and saved the franchise. Now, just to get to kind of the end here, you probably should never give away the ending of a story, but sometimes it works out. I mean, Titanic was a big hit. I think we all sort of saw where the end of that one was coming. Sometimes it's even in the title. I mean, Finding Nemo. Spoiler alert, he finds Nemo at the end. Well, at the end of this book, From Darkness to Dynasty, they become a dynasty. And specifically, I decided the best place to end it was with the 2001 season, which in and of itself, when they finally broke through and won a Super Bowl, is so fraught with bizarre happenstances, coincidences, 1,000,000-to-1 shots, that if any one of them didn't occur, they probably don't win that Super Bowl, and for all we know, haven't won any of the other three. Small things, big things, and hugely historic things. Small things like, for instance, they had a game, an overtime game against Buffalo that season. David Patton, great receiver, caught a pass, got knocked unconscious, fumbled the ball, Buffalo recovers, and they're going to drive down and kick a game-winning field goal. They review the play and find out that while Patton was knocked unconscious on the ground, his foot was touching the ball, and his head was out of bounds. So they said, dead ball, Patriots keep it, they go down and kick the game-winning field goal. A big thing that happened, Drew Bledsoe, the franchise quarterback, who prior to that season had signed the biggest contract in NFL history, goes rolling out on a scramble, gets hit by Mo Lewis of the Jets, in a play that almost killed him. Literally, he needed emergency surgery. It split his aorta, laterally, I guess you would call it, and he was bleeding internally. He gets replaced by the aforementioned Tom Brady. Had that not happened, or had it happened later in the season, who knows if Brady ever becomes Tom Brady. The hugely historic thing I mentioned, 9/11 had an impact on the Patriots' schedule insofar as a game they were going to play in week 2 was postponed through this weird quirk in the schedule. Their bye week was the last week of the season, week 17. They get that game moved to week 17. By the time they play it, the Carolina Panthers are the worst team in football. They've got one win on the year. They're about to fire the coach. So the Patriots had this cakewalk of a game. That led to them, instead of having to go on the road to play a playoff game, they got another week off and had the Snow Bowl game. Against the Raiders, the Tuck Rule game, in which the Raiders come to town and this call gets reversed, correctly by the way. Never let anybody tell you that was not the right call. It was in the rules, it was called against the Patriots in the game where Drew Bledsoe got hurt. This is why I am the way I am. I'm still having that argument with people, it was 15 years ago. But in this sort of perfect metaphor to kind of put a ribbon on this whole thing, while that game is being played, it was the greatest game in the history of the old stadium and the last game played in the old stadium. Because while they were playing that, being built on a hill out back of the old crappy stadium was the state-of-the-art place we now know as Gillette Stadium. So it's like this this crazy metaphor for here's this team in this embarrassingly laughable franchise in this embarrassingly laughable, terrible stadium, moving on to the state-of-the-art place at the exact same time that they were becoming a dynasty. And it's surreal. I think it's a great story. I wanted to do it justice. I pray that I did, because I've always wanted to see this be told right by somebody who lived it, who cared about the Patriots, who lived and died during all the good and bad times. And just kind of on a personal note, one of the great things about working at WEEI was every Monday during the season, got to sit down and talk to Bill Belichick. And I mean, closer to him than I am with you right now. And when I first got a hard copy of the book, I thought, you know what, maybe I'll take it down there. Maybe I'll give it to him, you know? But I don't know if you've heard this about him, but he has a bit of a reputation of being kind of a grumpy Gus. Super nice to me, but yeah, there's times you can be just a little cranky. And just happened to be one of those days. We had a short window to talk to him. He had to rush off to his press conference. And it was training camp, and maybe just wasn't having a good day or didn't have a nice hot breakfast or whatever. But at the end of the interview, I said, Bill, I don't know if you want to have this book. I can have a copy of the book. I wrote it. Like, you're in it. And, you know, spoiler, you win the Super Bowl. And, like, I swear he was whole demeanor changed. He's like, oh, this is great. Wow, I really appreciate it. That's great. Congratulations. Like, thanks, Bill. And he walks out of the room. And he came back a full minute later and said, Jerry, can I ask you to sign this for me? I immediately called my lovely wife and said, if you believe in the theory of the cosmos that says there's an infinite number of parallel universes that all exist together, we live in the only one where Bill Belichick asked for my autograph and I've never asked for his. Anyway, it's my first book ever. I love it. I love this process. Thank you. It's been in my head for a long time, and I always got intimidated by bookstores because I'd go and see all these other finished books and like, look at all these people that finished their book. And as soon as I finished it, as soon as it sold, now I come to these places, I go, look at all these people buying books. You're buying them. I'm like, Oprah, you have a book, you have a book, everybody gets a book. So thanks for supporting this. Thanks for supporting, literature, and for a first-time author, and for supporting the Patriots. And remember, if Tom Brady is not free, then no man is truly free. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions or just anecdotes or whatever. I was at one of these a while ago, and this older guy stood up. He was wearing like old NFL gear. I could tell it wasn't something he just got out of the box. Told me that on that Snow Bowl game, the tuck rule, he was working the first down markers. He was on the chain gang. And they corrected a mistake that the officials had made. They put the ball in the wrong spot. Like after the change of possessions, it was 5 yards further back than it should have been. And they corrected it, and Vinatieri's kick was good by like 2 yards. I go, dude, you're Forrest Gump. Like, you're a front row seat of history. You saved the world. Thank you. My man in the back, you had a question. Hey. Yep. Yep. Yes, we call that the worst dimension of all. The one where it's not Tom Brady, or that he went to the... And let me tell you something, too. You need to know, how old are you? You're like probably 10? Okay. Had the Patriots moved like that time I told you about, football was never coming back to New England. And it would have been about 12 years before you were born. And you, my friend, would have been raised a Giants fan. Imagine that. Imagine that. Right, exactly. I had 2 kids of my own. I would have been putting a number 10 Eli Manning shirt on. That slack-jawed goober. I can't stand the fact that he draws a breath, and the fact that we wouldn't have had Tom Brady, that he would have been playing in St. Louis, because that's where they were moving to. And I was actually in the Patriots office. One of the guys showed me merchandise he had. They were going to be the St. Louis Stallions. They actually made up hats and stuff. Real ugly, like purple and gold and stuff. So that's the one we're living in, this dimension. This is heaven, is what this is. They've won, what, 9 championships just in the time you've been born? Celtics, Bruins. Wow. That's unbelievable. You got it good. I hope you read this book. So you don't look at it. I'm like, it's like your grandparents going, back in my day, we had to watch the school with a potato in our pocket.
He should have been born in the 60s and put up what we did.
Yeah, exactly. You don't, right? I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo is the second best quarterback in the division. You know? And Jacoby Brissett might be the third. Just enjoy it while it lasts, my friend. God does not promise any of us a tomorrow. There you go. Oh, yeah. No, he's just going to keep going on forever. Does anyone have a question? Yes, sir.
With all the sports writers that we have had over this period of time, how did it fall to you? I mean, you rub shoulders with many of them. Why didn't Dan, Jerry? I mean, this is right up.
Yeah, that's a question that I've asked myself. Felger wrote a book. It was called Tales from the Patriots Sideline, which I used somewhat as source material, but it wasn't like focusing on all the dysfunction. I mean, there was much in there about Steve Nelson, who was a great player, and John Hanna was great, as it was the wacky stuff. But that was also a series of books that they did about every team in the league. They just grabbed the beat reporter and said, here you go. And Felger, while a good writer, was from Wisconsin, and so it didn't really mean anything to him. Yeah, and I think a couple people have made a couple of runs at it, but
Well, McDonough would have wrote it, but he was busy beating up Raymond Claiborne, right?
Yeah, exactly. And McDonough wrote some articles that I used as source material, but should have put them all together and just didn't. And I don't get it. Maybe other people just wired more normally and weren't just so emotionally plugged into this thing that they. I'm not kidding you. I watched the highlight the other day of the Vinatieri kick, the first one in that Super Bowl, and I'm like Pavlov's dog. I won't lie to you. I cry like a baby, like Sylvia Plath getting pepper sprayed. No sense at all.
You should write another book called The McPherson Years.
That would be a pamphlet, believe me. I've thought about, people said, how about a Deflategate book? And while I feel like I've chronicled every step of that, I don't know if the rest of the world is going to be interested in that. It might be one of those things I'd only write for myself. I'd rather write something that other people care about. Anyone else?
Prior to being a stand-up comedian, what were you doing?
What was I doing before that? I always had I've had a bizarre series of unconnected careers.
Been in the court system.
I was working in the court system, yeah. I mean, that's the only reason I was there. I was working in the court system. Yeah, no, I was a badge monkey for a long time. And, full disclosure, lawyers would come to in the middle of trials and go, so, hey, how do you think the trial's going? I'm like, what, your little thing? Frankly, I've been on my phone reading about the Patriots. I don't know. Wait, what is it, a murder trial? I don't know. Good luck. I hope your guy gets off. I don't know. This is my passion. It's what I cared about. And just that, whatever, while we're all friends here, I had a moment where there was a chance I could have worked a side job through the courts doing road details. I'm making a ton of money doing that, and those guys make a small fortune. And I ran it by my lovely wife and said, I could do this, and we need the money. And she was, no, I don't want you doing that. I want you to work on your writing, work on your comedy. I go, it might never amount to anything. I might not make any money out of it. She goes, I don't care. I don't want you standing by a ditch watching other men work. You should work on your creativity. And a few years later, I write about the Patriots for a living and write books and do stand-up and don't do anything that isn't express myself creatively. So let there be a lesson to you, young men. Marry a great woman. Not now. Take your time with that. Believe me. I know you think girls are yucky, and you will think that again when you're my age. But no, it's just a personal lesson. So yeah, now I'm back at Barstool, which is a kind of the pirate ship where I first started writing. Learned that I love doing this, and when you ask Bill Belichick, you read Barstool, he goes, oh yeah, all the time. And I met Robert Kraft at a party, and they're huge into the school, so it's a great opportunity. Thanks, and you know what? It means there's more books in me because I can focus the time on it. Yes, Miss in the back.
Tom Brady and Bill Belichick.
Belichick has collaborated on a couple of books that have written about him. A really interesting one by one of the great writers of the 20th and 21st century, David Halberstam, wrote one about him called The Education of a Coach. I like to think Brady would. I would like both of those guys at some point. While I never want them to retire, when that day comes, I hope they go, okay, here's what I really think of everybody. And take the gloves off and just lay waste of those feckless, empty-suited, backstabbing, witch-hunting maniacs who run that league, and have smeared them, and taking guys who've done nothing but represent the league with class and dignity and be respectful to everybody, and have destroyed their reputations. I hope they do that. And if they do, I know just the author. In fact, I think I've got it half written in my head. I just need to just rubber stamp it. I'm sorry, somebody, did you have anything to raise yet?
No, when you said, do you have other ideas for books? And other than football, like, do you have other sports that
I do. I like all sports. I really do. Football, just for whatever reason, is that thing. When you drive around on a Saturday and there's a guy in the driveway with the hood of his car up and all the parts on a padded blanket in his driveway. That's sort of how I am with football. Like, I want to know how all the parts work and how they interconnect. And maybe to a lesser extent baseball and hockey. I like hockey, but I just want the car to run. And I'll just take it to the shop and change the oil. Like, call me when playoff time comes. I know this. Having written a book, it was worth it. Like, you hear athletes that win a title and they go, this is why we lift all them weights. It was worth it, and I want to do it again. And that's how I feel about this. I don't want this to be the last thing I've ever done. What that idea is, I'll work it out. I'm open to suggestions. Yes, sir.
In the book, did you cover the Matt Millen hitting Chucky incident?
Oh, yeah, it was actually Pat Sullivan. This is a great story, too. So typical of the Patriots. On their run to the Super Bowl to play the Bears, their second win. Now, prior to that, they'd never won a playoff game in my lifetime. They win the wild card game. They go to L.A., where the Raiders were then. They beat the Raiders in this really dramatic win. And the vice president in charge of football operations was the other son, not Chuck, it was Pat Sullivan, who decides to celebrate the moment by making a complete jackass out of himself. Taunting the Raiders sideline, screaming at Howie Long, whose son Chris now plays for the Patriots, screaming at him, and how do you like them apples, or whatever he's doing. So Matt Millen comes along, a huge bear of a linebacker, comes along, sees this idiot flailing his arms and yelling at his teammate, and just goes up and cold cocks him in the side of the head, to the delight of every Patriots fan. And there is a great picture I could not get my hands on for the book, but it's Millen with his massive hand, like the fist the size of the cornerstone of a building, like this, and Pat Sullivan's face all distorted like that, because that's how the Patriots were. Like, didn't even have the class to win properly. Typical of them. I'm sorry, my microphone. But again, as I say, even when things went well, they went badly for that team, and that was just a prime example.
How long did you have to pitch the book?
I first got contacted by an agency in Manhattan about this that got the wheels in motion. And then when it was largely done and they put it out in the market, we had an offer within a day, and then another offer like a day later, and then someone doubled an offer, and they just said, jackpot. And so that was really gratifying too, because you don't know. You spend a lot of hours at a laptop or sit at the library or whatever, and it was very humbling to know that someone said, okay, I get this. And it took a lot of editing. I know those guys had to put up the sawhorses and the miners' helmets and work all night to get this thing ready, because I'm a really sloppy writer, but bless them, I'm really proud of the fact that it sold so quickly. Yes, sir. You know what? That would be an interesting one, because his story in of itself, and I'm a little partial to the man because he saved the team that I love and kept it from going to St. Louis. But a guy who was a fan, who like had season tickets. And by the way, when he bought the team, he didn't tell his wife. He just came home and said, honey, I made a deal today. I spent $175 million on a football team. She's like, you know what it's like when you're, I don't know, when your husband goes out and buys himself like a new set of golf clubs without checking. He bought a football team. But you thought he was out of his cotton pick of mind. But you know what? That in of itself might be a good thing, because he's been, you know, a guy who's been both respected and sort of reviled by people who don't realize that if he didn't make that $175 million gamble, then, like I said, we'd be Giants fans. Imagine the horror of that. So, but thank you. That's not a bad suggestion. I think they would cooperate with me too, because I've sort of been worshiping at the feet of these people. Kind of shamelessly too. Well, I guess we're done here. I guess my awesomeness has.
Remain seated, and then those in the front row, you can stand up and come line up. And then the second row, you guys can just come down the middle aisle and then look around.
I'll go right now.
Sure. So my brother has the books, and I want to give them. You have to go downstairs.
Yeah, they're downstairs. Yep.